The entire world was wondering what Bungie was going to do post-Microsoft after finishing their last contractually obligated shooter alongside the future herald of the Halo series 343 Studios, with Halo Reach. Bungie, for the first time in 9 years, was leaving Halo behind. From many of the same creators and major heads behind the Halo series, they would cook up an idea somewhere between Halo and World of Warcraft, an online RPG approach with shooter gameplay. This title would be dubbed Destiny 1 and would launch 4 years after its development began, September 9th, 2014, on the Xbox and PlayStation platforms. Destiny 1, despite faring well commercially, was actually rated and received quite poorly by both critics and players alike. It was sort of the game that needed multiple years to cook into something more final, but once it did, with expansions like The Taken King, Destiny 1 was a solid Mass Effect-esque shooter with a shared online world, making it incredibly unique. But in a slightly surprising turn of events, despite the ideas of Destiny 1 lasting for years, with expansion after expansion, things would actually take a turn when Destiny 2 would be instead erected a mere 3 years after the first game's launch. This would leave Destiny 1 effectively abandoned and shifted to a state of maintenance mode with no new content by 2017 and on. That's why we're talking about it on the series today. The Death of a Game series, where we search for the largest contributing factors to a game or company's death by utilizing a timeline of events and various pieces of evidence, all culminating in a final deduction where we gather all of the clues together and put the case to rest, with a hint on what the next episode will be at the very end of the episode as well. Whether you chose a hunter, a guardian who specializes in stealth and sniper combat, a titan, which serves as the heavy assault class, or finally, the warlock who effectively were like gun mages, the world of, well, sort of our world with some mythological and magical elements thrown in as well, is awaiting us detectives. We have a mystery to solve and many epic monsters to slay along the way. Thank you to Encore for sponsoring this video. Encore is a marketplace for retro video games and collectibles that emphasizes trust, community, and entertainment. Sellers post 30 to 60 second clips of their products for sale, either as auctions or buy now listings. Shipping labels are provided within the app, and once you make a sale, you just simply go to your profile, sold tab, and generate a label. The app even has video auctions which can last up to 7 days. And of course, the classic buy now offers too. There's even a live chat on the auctions using the app. Encore is the place to learn about and shop for retro video games. Real collectors will tell you about the games they are selling, and many will even show you gameplay recordings too. The auctions on Encore can get crazy on some of their rare items. With last item bids flying in and lots of trash talking in chat, you could even find some friends or some enemies. Encore takes trust and safety seriously, with all sellers being ID verified, and protects you when your items come, not as described. Encore also has great customer service in case you have an issue with your auction. There's a ton of giveaways on the app that are completely free to enter, and Encore even pays for giveaway shipping, so you don't have to pay for anything. Once you've entered a giveaway, you can even get 5 extra entries per friend you bring in to join in on the giveaway. This can increase your odds of winning just by sharing your link with friends. Speaking of links, use my link in the description below to download Encore on your iOS or Android device using the App Store and check out the awesome giveaways going on there. The story begins quite far back, and that's because in order to get a better picture about Bungie with and post-Microsoft, we have to start after the splitting of the two, who had partnered together since 2000. Microsoft reportedly always had a contentious relationship with Bungie, which could be influenced due to the fact that Microsoft leadership of the time was more pro-business than in the modern times today. Another point of contention, though, was simply that Bungie themselves, who not only didn't like anyone else not themselves touching their IPs like Halo, some of the original founders, such as Jason Jones, the project lead on Halo 2, now a major game director and executive at Bungie, didn't even want a sequel to Halo 1, period. And him and others held resentment over the fact that they were forced, sort of, by Microsoft to make multiple Halo games, including up to Reach, which would actually be the last game that Microsoft and Bungie would work on in tandem. Bungie was a different company, less of the corporate money bro and more of the gamer bro type, the kind that made them very lovable and easy to root for by other gamers. But this would also lead to a cool kids club culture, as we will talk about more in length later, where seniority would matter overall, and shame was a common tactic when passing feedback below. Following the launching and success of Halo Reach, Bungie would stop making Halo games due to losing the license to them and would instead decide to make a new IP, another shooter, this time a more online-focused one, originally dubbed under the moniker Project Tiger before becoming Destiny as we know it today. Project Tiger was the original name due to utilizing the Tiger engine, a heavily modified Halo engine that allowed for more high-fidelity visuals and a better seamless matchmaking system akin to a shared online world, more so than a typical system. However, even early on, the dev teams were met with tremendous issues utilizing the Tiger engine, such as it not being the best suited for an always online game. But more complex than that was the fact that 30-minute changes on the map due to the engine architecture would take up to 8 hours to load a new map on the server for, and then up to 20 minutes per delay of interaction. But instead of taking more time to deliver due to this, Destiny 1 would instead choose to crunch to an insane degree. One the company was kind of famous for, but now had a different reason for engaging in. That's because Destiny, as Project Tiger was now known as, was an ambitious and incredibly expensive project. Not only was it always online, it was pushing the boundaries of gameplay and visuals typical in such games. Destiny was also originally sold as an ever-expanding shared world, which wasn't going to be cheap to develop, let alone maintain, and continue to make content for. Bungie would enter a deal with the devil in a sense, as later described more or less, and enter a 10-year publishing deal with Activision Blizzard over Destiny. The reason that AB was chosen was due to them not forcing Destiny to give up the IP, which was probably non-negotiable due to them losing the Halo IP. We have a crazy amount of details concerning this due to the contract between Bungie and Activision Blizzard getting leaked during the Vince Zampella drama and departure from Infinity Ward. AB would have strong financial requirements, however, and enforce an incredibly strict content schedule that stated that DLCs were going to be needed to be released every other year going forward. This would make it to where not only the game would be crunched to begin with, it would likely be crunched following the launch to keep up with the content demands. There were some more specifics, such as Destiny 1 receiving significant overall budget and development, around like $200 million or plus, based on projections in the contract, and Bungie receiving about $2.5 million in funding per year from Activision. There were some bonus promises, such as the biggest one being for reaching a 90 on Metacritic. According to Marty O'Donnell, though, who worked on the soundtrack of Halo and the upcoming Bungie title Destiny as well, the deal was kind of screwed from the jump, especially after a strange dinner with the Activision CFO, in which O'Donnell would joke about being nice to the goose, referencing Bungie, and the CFO would reference foie gras, which is force-fed geese before slaughtering them. Worse, O'Donnell, who I've spoken with personally before and has posted on my videos, even claimed that Bungie leadership was also to blame during the partnership, because they failed to resist any suggestions passed to them by them concerning their upcoming shooter, compromising the title in his eyes somewhat. Although Destiny was often called an MMO by those not on the development team, the leaks that would happen as early as November 2012 would confirm that it just wasn't, featuring a more online RPG, Phantasy Star Online style approach with hubs that you would team up at and zones that you would then explore with said team. Destiny was also described as being social in its core, with stories given about how you could hear bullets and then just turn around and see players playing with you. Whoa. Destiny was capped at 16 players per lobby though in reality, and used a server meshing system that would allow you to publicly matchmake with other players in that lobby or make things private and form a group of 3. It's not hard to make comparisons to WoW when it currently especially shares so much of these same concepts of WoW. Difference being, like modern WoW, Destiny 1 was more about a collection of missions playable in different regions than a full open world MMO style game. At least that's what it was molded to be over time, as it was the less ambitious approach. But with raids only being playable with up to 6 players, Destiny 1 was more like an online RPG, but considering Japan dominated that market, Destiny 1 might actually be the first chance that the Western market had to be successful there in their own right. One that's extremely competitive with other ones due to its superb gameplay and graphics, which is kind of needed for that genre, but also the fact that the genre didn't have any of the sci-fi space shooters with special powers, which is exactly what Destiny was. However, major changes would happen in the summer of 2013, where after years of working, Joseph Staten, a longtime developer and the main writer for Bungie for like 4 of their main games, would get his world story and plot scrapped in favor of creating a rebooted story utilizing some of the same elements, such as the Guardians and even the Traveler. But the drama behind this is as follows. Joseph Staten was reportedly, with his team of writers, working on the supercut of his overall story, a condensed bullet point-esque story cut. This story cut would be showcased in the summer of 2013, but would fail to satisfy the higher-ups, who either just didn't understand the point of a supercut, or, like Jason Jones, would claim that it was too similar to Halo and too complex and esoteric. According to more reports, some developers argued that it wasn't really presented very well, being plagued with bugs and poor quality voiceovers. But Joseph was the guy behind most of Bungie's story success, and I find it more likely, probability-wise, I mean, he was like 4 for 4, that he just needed more time or more exposition to help build the understanding for the story. His departure, though, clearly shows that a lack of respect was kind of given for him, which would be confirmed when Staten would state that he received mixed feedback from Jason Jones consistently regarding the story. Joseph Staten would leave following the exchanges. The actual story and alpha build of this game was actually leaked a few years ago, and even more recently, which turns out that many of the cooler ideas in the Destiny franchise came from these early cuts, such as a more shared and expansive world being reduced to just a bunch of multiple planets with missions selectable in them. Many people would argue, whether we will ever know or not, people haven't gotten the alpha build to actually work yet, that the Staten cut, as it's often called, would have been better regardless, since Staten and his team already wrote the majority of the game's lore and world anyway, and the story that they would launch the game with later on was deemed quite poor. Jason Jones, Luke Smith, a former journalist turned game developer, and Chris Barrett, who was a designer at the time, would form the Iron Bar and start working behind the remaining writing team's back, rewriting the story as non-writers and being closed off regarding feedback. Even from some of the OGs involved like Marty O'Donnell, who disliked the new direction so much that he voiced his concerns about it up until he was fired, but it doesn't end there either. Jason Jones would also start feuding with the former director of Destiny, Jamie Griesemer, sorry about your name, the main designer behind the Halo IP as well. During this time, Bungie was ballooning up to like 300 plus developers, and Jason Jones was forced to manage many ex-Halo developers, having just finished Halo Reach in the ODST expansion. Jamie would keep presenting issues with the lack of detail in the game's early development, and ask important questions that many felt were still unanswered even after he departed, which he would do, as he was either terminated or left sometime in 2010 or 2011. Now, Luke Smith I don't have a lot about, but this is the second member of the Iron Bar and was not ever referred to by any of the sources I have ever read or been sent that he was difficult to work with. But many would argue that he had a lack of video game development experience, which led to his decision-making being worse. Now, the final member, Chris Barrett, would later be terminated following a sexual harassment claim, or almost like a dozen of them, where it was alleged he would text almost like a dozen different women, playing power games with them and abusing his stature as an executive at Bungie. He was also incredibly difficult to work with, according to reports. So without mincing words, and already so early in this video, don't ever let anyone tell you about the narrative surrounding Bungie. They weren't always these like helpless nerds who always made good decisions but were just bullied by the big corpo jocks or something. They were part of the problem, arguably, even from the beginning. I mean, the ODST expansion, most famously, was hated by the higher-ups at Bungie, and actually had to be pushed by the people at 343 and some of the other people surrounding. And there's many more examples like this where Bungie would double down on particular stances and then end up being horribly wrong about them and never admit their wrongness. And now they were creating problems in Destiny 1, especially because Microsoft wasn't standing over their shoulders making sure they weren't. The upper management at Destiny 1 made the development harder than it needed to be, and led to plenty of cut content and crunch time. This calls the support Bungie got post-Microsoft kind of into question, because it makes it seem like if they were also the problem post-Microsoft, maybe they were the problem during it as well. And perhaps Microsoft being strict with them was what led to the success of Bungie with the Halo series anyway. Destiny 1 was shockingly supposed to originally launch in 2013, but would be delayed quietly with a new release date announced for later in 2014. Destiny would then come to beta on the PS4 platform first, a tradition it would continue to exercise going forward due to an exclusivity deal that Bungie would negotiate with Sony. This would puzzle some fans due to Bungie's long-standing relationship with Microsoft and their audience on Xbox, but if you remember that, as I've stated already, that relationship prior was rocky, I think it makes a lot more sense. Marty O'Donnell, following the exchange I previously referenced, would depart Bungie for good, citing issues with both Activision and Blizzard, who acquired Bungie just weeks after he joined it, and upper management at Bungie. However, things wouldn't end there. Due to unpaid royalties and a claim of an unjust firing, Marty O'Donnell would take Bungie to court, targeting CEO Harold Ryan in particular, and succeed in settling that lawsuit with them. Now, with Marty, James, and Joseph gone, 3 of the original major names and talents behind the Halo franchise were gone as well, and it didn't make any fans more optimistic about what was coming next. Destiny 1 would launch just at the launch of the new set of consoles, and would launch on PS4 and Xbox One major platforms, followed by the Xbox 360 and PS3 launches too, which is pretty impressive but likely explains why the game was limited to just 30 FPS. While Destiny 1 would only score a 76 out of 100 on aggregate review website Metacritic, a far cry from the bonus-needing 90 score it was supposed to score, it would smash many sales records, generating a whopping $325 million in just the first 5 days of launch. This was larger than the game's development budget, but smaller than its overall budget, which also included the marketing and production stuff, an amount they would reportedly clear within the next week. GameSpot in their review of Destiny 1 would score the game just a 6 out of 10. Which was kind of low for such a large budget game, but would enjoy the gorgeous visuals, solid shooter fundamentals that the game was kind of really known for, and the fun competitive maps and PvP play. IGN, on the other hand, was nicer, scoring it a 7.8 out of 10, but stating that although it looks and plays wonderfully, promises that were made originally were left unfulfilled. Such as the fact that you can't even communicate with anyone who's not already in your party, and that there was a lack of loot trading, and the lack of matchmaking for raids or strike content, which was bizarre to think about in hindsight. Both reviews, though, lament the potential of the game, but both feel like it failed in offering its initial vision. The audience reception was slightly more negative, with most of the criticism being levied at the game's lack of story, coherent or some story period, and repetitive nature of the game. The story in Destiny 1 is honestly legendary, and kind of for the wrong reasons. It's Dark Souls-esque in ways where you have to dig around the game to actually learn more about the game's story, but the problem being is that Destiny 1 is like a narrative-focused game, and almost all online RPGs are. Thus, this void would lead to a poorly packaged story. Destiny 1's story is not just convoluted, it's boring most of the time, with lackluster cutscenes and a total lack of danger. I mean, the villain in Destiny 1, the base game, almost doesn't even exist until the later expansions introduce them. And the majority of the base game story, if there is any, is findable or explorable in wikis online and outside of the game, or even just watching like lore wizard videos on YouTube, but it's hard not to feel like the game's story was written by non-writers. And the parts that were written by writers, you have to actually do some digging to even go find them. This was all really problematic and a narrative-focused live service game. But really, there's so many Destiny 1 memes, like try googling Destiny 1 villain, and good luck finding out who the hell it is. A game, though, that was already, according to Activision publishing CEO, was already working on the next expansions, and the next sequel. While this might sound par for the course, in most cases, live service games these days basically translate to the first or second expansion being cut content that was already supposed to be in the game, like in SWTOR with Shadow of Revan. The issue being, it's like they were designing their game ahead of time to not be complete when they launched it, because they wanted you to pay for the next content introduction. This was problematic because many felt that Destiny was already lacking content-wise. Worse, behind the scenes Bungie was struggling to keep up with the DLC expansion demand placed on them by their new publisher Activision Blizzard, and would then negotiate a sequel idea instead in an attempt to give themselves some legroom. That's right, Bungie would actually become then contractually obligated to not just deliver more DLC expansions for Destiny 1, but deliver a sequel, which would start development in 2014. The first expansion, The Dark Below, would drop only a few months after launch, and it would be easily rated the worst in the game's history. This was because The Dark Below needed to be rebooted, like the previous game build, and was created in a record-breaking 9 weeks of crunch time. The Dark Below would introduce new Crucible maps, which was the PvP portion of the game, 4 new story missions, and a new raid and strike, all for $20. According to IGN, who reviewed it, they would state that it was only worth it for the raid, and due to the fact that it also gave you better gear than the normal content included in the game. The Dark Below wasn't bad as much as it was just derivative, and failed to actually elevate Destiny in any serious way, including its lackluster story. But hey, at least it actually introduced a villain. The CEO of Bungie, in a shocking turn of events, would step down just 1 month later, without a public reason listed for why. Harold Ryan was also involved with the Marty O'Donnell situation. Harold Ryan would also have an interesting history, and while he probably certainly has his talents, like helping helm Bungie for ages, his actual impact on the game development seemed minimal and downright incendiary at times, which kind of you expect from like an American top CEO, to be fair. But Harold wouldn't just depart Bungie and have greener pastures, he would go on to create Probably Monsters, a company that would then create more spin-off studios, spending nearly 9 years before they would then create their first game, and that game? Concord. A $200 million failure. This isn't to rub it in with Harold Rhyme, but to acknowledge more that the upper management at Bungie was incredibly problematic, not without fault, and even causing problems outside of the company. House of Wolves, the second planned expansion for Destiny 1, would drop in the summer of 2015. This expansion was better received than the previous, in large part due to the players not losing perks when upgrading their items to new stats, and the addition of 2 new modes. Prison of Elders, a PvE arena, and the Trials of Osiris, a kick-ass unique PvP weekly mode. Destiny 1's major moment in the sun, however, would come with their third expansion, and their first major expansion, The Taken King. The Taken King took the previous DLC stories and expanded upon them, featuring Oryx, the father of Crota, the antagonist of the Dark Below expansion. Oryx would show up and be kind of angry because Crota was his son, and would show up with an intergalactic fleet as well and try to lay waste upon you and the galaxy. This expansion would also feature a full feature campaign, 3 strike missions, and 3 new modes of play. The expansion was so successful that Sony would announce that it broke records on the most downloaded in a day. However, something precarious about the expansions though, and the future ones for D1, is that they wouldn't drop on all platforms at the same time, if you remember, due to the Sony exclusivity that I mentioned. In fact, it would take a full year for the expansions to then launch on Xbox. The Taken King wasn't just a hit expansion either, it was proof that Destiny worked as an idea, and proof that Statton's vision wasn't totally fugazi. I mean, it was written by a writer under Statton's tutelage before he left the company, Clay Carmouche, who would also leave later on. According to a Jason Schreier report, the expansion was supposed to be much more, featuring a brand new planet, but instead ending up focusing on just one major zone, which was a much smaller piece than originally promised. The expansion, like the previous one, wasn't fully priced, but initially was set to be full price, but wasn't due to the cuts that they settled on. Charging for every expansion in the base game wasn't the only way that Destiny was going to start monetizing, however. Bungie would also start selling level boosts and even add a cash shop dubbed the Eververse Trading Company, which would generate millions in revenue. While these are standard fare in most virtual worlds, they shouldn't be. Level boosting is the definition of pay to win, and it's a lazy way to reward bad video game development and bad expansions that are overly vertical. You're also supporting the fact that the expansions must now be bought sequentially to properly function with all of the content in the game, which means that you're getting nickel and dimed for less. The Cash Shop edition was inexcusable, and yet they tried to excuse it anyway when Bungie would state that it was due to them needing another year of support. My issue with this claim is that it's very disingenuous, because you're not going to support Destiny 1 after that point, because you're launching the sequel. So it feels like you're just milking that last audience before you abandon them for the sequel, since D1 wasn't going to receive any more updates after its last expansion. Which was The Rise of Iron, by the way. The game's last expansion would drop September 20th, 2016. And although the expansion wasn't terrible, it felt very low effort, when most of the content was just like reskinned. We're talking armor sets, levels, factional weapons looking the same, and only having a 5-mission campaign. These missions, though, would introduce the Iron Lords, which were a group of freedom fighters who came before the Guardians and were nearly wiped out by a SIVA virus. The expansion would also only be available on PS4 and Xbox One, though Bungie would state that it was because of 90% of the player base being on those platforms. So Destiny over time, especially if you didn't buy all the expansions, which was required to buy them sequentially, you were not only losing content in the game, its previously supported platforms after were missing out on the content entirely. Although the reason given is understandable, it doesn't change the fact that now they just maintenance mode 2 of the 4 platforms they launched on. While Destiny 2 was originally planned for 2016, it wouldn't release until September 2017. Bungie loves the month of September, by the way. I won't spend too much time talking about Destiny 2, since this video is about the first game, but I will cover it in some auxiliary fashion to help round out the story about D1. But Destiny 2, for many players, was a total upgrade to D1, because it had a more cohesive story, perfected game mechanics, and a better and new approach to progression. While for others, it was a better story, sure, but not really that much better. And the game also still feels a lot more like a response to the audience who didn't like Destiny 1, instead of supporting that audience who did. Worse, and the most damning thing that you can say about Destiny 2 is that it felt like it was the confirmation of the original vision no longer being the original vision. This ever-evolving open-world shared online game with roaming NPCs and unique locations was not the current or future vision anymore. And Destiny 2 doubled down on being a mission shooter, more so than an online RPG shooter or virtual world, though it did have better matchmaking. Bungie would split from Activision in January of 2019 and maintain Destiny's rights in the process. While this was faster than the previous deal had been inked for, it's speculated that it was possible due to Bungie not meeting the deliverables for Activision Blizzard. This was a great situation for Destiny and Bungie though. Theoretically now, they had the chance to prove to people that they were being held back and right the wrongs of their successful but controversial space sci-fi shooter. A bomb would drop 2021, or a few of them, concerning Bungie and the behind the scenes concerning the development of Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. A major report would be released showcasing tons of apparent toxic workplace issues, sexism, and harassment in the workplace. Remember, Chris Barrett, who was all over Destiny 1's development, including the reboot, was also a casualty in this process. Pete Parsons, the new CEO following Ryan stepping down, would respond to these reports with commitment to making the culture better at Bungie, starting with a change in approach. Parsons would admit that Bungie utilized a cool kids in class organization formula based on seniority, which is why so much fuckery was allowed in the first place with the senior members. That last part I added myself. However, just a week later, and the HR head would step down, an important position when trying to repair your bad image from this point on. And remember, in some of these claims, there were claims that the HR head was also shielding people, which is kind of their job since they're supposed to protect the company, which is also fucked up about HR. But anyway, Destiny and Bungie proper would start to lose even more of their talent. Chris Barrett would even try to come out and challenge the claims later on of why they got fired and actually take Bungie to court over it, and then Bungie would release the text chat, and it would showcase exactly what they were accused of. In the wake of this, Sony would then buy Bungie for almost $4 billion, a move that would then grant Bungie the future funding that they would probably need for new titles and the maintenance on their previous ones. And it was almost like, just due to the sheer size and ambition of Bungie as a company, it seemed like they could never stay independent for long. Bungie would announce major layoffs a few years later with a major reduction in 17% of their company workforce, a whopping 220 people, showing that their moneymakers Destiny 1 and Destiny 2 were starting to dry up, as they would cite financial reasons for the departures. Bungie would even have a former lawyer decry the upper management with further reports that, even with Sony, their new caretaker, Sony wasn't pleased either with how they've been handling things. As such, Bungie is not in a good spot right now, and it's hard not to think that Destiny 1 wasn't at least part of the reason why for that, when it failed to deliver on expectations so grandly, and it still made like $500 million. Remember, Destiny 1 was probably positive in its budget of like $500 million, but reportedly, it still wasn't impressive enough for Activision Blizzard at the time that they were working together. Now, something I've not really mentioned enough about is the frat cool kids culture at Bungie. While I think that I can safely say that this is also probably why games like Halo 1 have so much soul, without Microsoft rattling the cages at Bungie, you can see what happens. Look at Halo 2's controversial development and Bungie pulling a rabbit out of the hat there. That could have already been, so early on, the second Halo title, an unsuccessful Halo title. It seemed like Bungie, with its non-standard development culture, constantly needed direction, including from outside, lest they get carried away and end up kind of spinning their gears too much. The sheer amount of ego on the development team, especially at the higher end, was staggering, and when those egos grew post-Halo Boom, it was almost like the developers just couldn't work together anymore due to it. But this section is really dedicated more to reminding you that Bungie was culpable in all of this. They had been the reoccurring theme, right? And are much to blame for why Destiny 1 wasn't as good as it could have been, and Destiny 2. And sure, their deal signing with Activision Blizzard basically wrote the death note for Destiny 1, but their career is also kind of filled with problematic behavior and radical positions. With the music playing, we have a case that's coming to a close, detectives. This video has been a treasure trove of Destiny information and clues concerning why the first game failed to match the expectations that were set on it. And so, if you weren't paying attention, or just simply missed any of the clues along the way, why did Destiny 1 die, or in this case, get shifted to maintenance mode just 2 years after it launched? Well, it's because it got abandoned for Destiny 2. And that was a game that they were contractually obligated to kind of make, and thus abandon their first game. That was because of the Activision Blizzard deal. But you can argue that their failure to execute their original ambitious ideas were also part of the problem. Just like you can say that Destiny, even when it was good, was an incredibly expensive value proposition. Bungie upper management and their swing and missing. The slew of harassment accusations and the subsequent departures. That cool kids culture that I talked about. Destiny 1 was so much, but it could have been so much more, if not for many of the obstacles that I outlined already. But what we got in the end still wasn't half bad, especially after the expansions came out. If anything, my biggest gripe with the game is the fact that it never came out on PC. The problem being though, half bad, for a multi-$100 million project was kind of bad, and us kind of settling for it and paying the expensive content price that the Destiny require of its gamers doesn't really help things either. Now, I'm not blaming the gamers who play Destiny 1 necessarily, but it's more that Destiny 1 wasn't all it was cut out to be originally. It was kind of an overhyped title that failed to deliver on its initial ambitious promises. But that also happened to actually end up, regardless, being a pretty gorgeous and kick-ass playing game. I guess the story in the end is about nuance, the good with the bad. But I can't help but feel like, and I'm sure many other Destiny 1 fans feel the same way, that Destiny 1 never really got a fair shake, since it was left behind for the sequel so quickly. First off, I should say I think making sequels as an online RPG is a really good idea, and a reason that I shit on WoW so much. But doing it so soon and no longer supporting your previous game just doesn't make sense. It's not what Lineage does, and that game makes $1 billion. I also know I'm not alone in this feeling, but I wanted to see some of those same boundaries that Destiny already pushed and broke in different and more massive online-focused ways. So critical opinions or not, Destiny 1 was a necessary title for gaming as a whole to teach us both what we wanted, didn't want, and well, what we still kind of want. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments below what you thought of Destiny 1, and tell me about some of your best or worst experiences with the game. Until the next case,